There's only so many logs to build this cabin that we're trying to build here, and everybody wants them. So, I mean, it is playing those tiers and just looking at it that regard of how many is left in the tier. Is it going to make it to me? Do I need to make a move here? And yeah, I mean, I could talk myself into Tedero McMillan being my wide receiver 1, but I also don't know that I'm going to win any championships anytime soon if Tedero McMillan's my wide receiver 1 on this roster.
Welcome to Dynasty Compass. I am your host, Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B from Footballguys. Thrilled today to be joined by the Jeff B from Footballguys, Jeff Bell, back for your second time here on the show and episode 50 overall. Jeff, welcome back to Dynasty Compass.
And Jeff, you're always way too kind. We're all one, the Jeff Hive. We're all together there, and you know, it's great. It was great seeing you in Canton. You were the MVP. You really held down the booth, and I know there was one point we realized that Jeff was left alone at the booth, and he was manning everything, and we probably shouldn't do that because we all kind of got pulled in different conversations. But Jeff, it's fantastic to be here, and really thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't very long. I was alone, only about 100 minutes or so. So it was just fine. Not a problem.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about wide receivers today. And you have been doing a lot of talking about wide receivers and a lot of writing about wide receivers. You've probably written tens of thousands of words about them this year alone. What's kind of the state of the position right now as we look at entering the 2026 season?
Well, so much talk about where we're standing right now, I think is less about wide receivers, more about tight ends, more about heavy formation, more about these shifts of what we're seeing across the league to attack. It's not so much the cover 2 shell, but it's just the hybrid ability of defenses to shift out of different looks into an offense is trying to dictate the packages that they're going to see, trying to attack with these heavy sets. And then I think a lot of that, if you're looking, I always think it's so funny when you look at the way that the Super Bowl went, because it seems to be whoever won the Super Bowl dictates the entire narrative, even if the other team is still a very, very good team and built slightly different. But, with Seattle winning the Super Bowl, obviously the defense was a big factor there, but Jackson Smith-Njigba was the big factor there. And so as you're starting to look at these heavy packages, I think it's easy for us to think, well, more tight ends on the field mean more targets for tight ends. And to some regard, okay, but really why they're trying to get into these heavy packages is because defenses have done such a good job of limiting explosives. And so what they're seeing with the Rams being the picture of these multiple tight end sets, really that was Puka Nacua and Matthew Stafford. And so having more blockers in there, the ability to generate explosive with Puka Nacua, Seattle Seahawks having more, playing AJ Barner, playing more tight end packages, being in a more of a run heavy look, and then leaning hard on Jackson Smith-Njigba. And so I think that to some regard, you're seeing more Jackson Smith-Njigba breaking records or coming close on wide receiver target share, those types of things that I think we're getting into this where there's more large men on the field in order to create explosives for the players that we really want to see the ball getting to.
And then, of course, with the more large men on the field, it means some of the other men are not. And so the wide receiver 3 is becoming an endangered species in the NFL. As you're looking at that, what kind of a look into your crystal ball and said, is there a future at all for the wide receiver 3, the 11 personnel in the NFL, at least for the next year or two? It's a copycat league. We may all be back at 11 personnel in 2 years, but right now, heavy personnel are dominant.
I mean, I'm somebody that I didn't ever want to draft the wide receiver 3 in an offense anyways. And so it's kind of, it's a good point that you bring up, but I think it's an interesting conversation because it's like outside of there's the Brandon Stokely year with the Colts, or there's the year with the Broncos when they had Wes Welker and Decker and Demaryius Thomas. We can name on one hand where we felt good about having 3 wide receivers within an offense. And to some regard, it's less that, and two, maybe some people needed help to not have the wide receiver 3 in their offense on their fantasy teams, because I don't think that's good team construction and building that way to have that player that's going to be lower there. It really comes down to probably narrowing those targets and then seeing involvement for tight ends, seeing involvement for running backs in the passing game. To some regard, it's I think we are in a spot. It was a long time ago that Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski broke out that 1 year for the Patriots. And so this idea of having multiple tight ends, it sounds great on paper. It sounds great when you're putting together, but then you get into camp and you realize your wide receiver 3 is worlds better than your tight end 2. And so I think it is a little bit overblown on the heavy sets, and even the Rams on them doing it. I think when you break it down, the games that they kind of were dominating those games already. And so it's like, if they're already blowing teams out and running it down their throat and then able to throw out of that formation, that's going to work great more often than not. But I think that overall, I'm hesitant to say the wide receiver 3 is going to disappear within an offensive scheme. I still think that even for all the talk on 2 tight end sets, you still probably saw more formations in 11 personnel than anything else that you saw.
I think that is still the case. It's just no longer, I think, the majority formation, but still very much a plurality kind of formation. But to me, where it comes in, and I love that you said you don't really like to draft a team's wide receiver 3 already. And I think for some of us who look at it, that is kind of a low but safe floor kind of position to hold on your bench, so that when all of your starters are on bye and hurt, you've got, some relatively guaranteed production, a guy who can step up. But it kind of looks like that assumption's gone, that the floor now for that wide receiver 3 might actually be 0. If they're out there at all, they're blocking or they're running cardio, and then sometimes they are still involved in the offense in 11 personnel. Is that kind of a thought that you're also having as you're looking out across the wide receiver landscape and thinking about, if I'm going to build a wide receiver room, I need to make sure that it doesn't have wide receiver 3s in it?
Well, I do think that that's a trap to some regard of what you'll see on. I think the unflattering term that gets thrown about so often is roster clogger, but really looking at it as it can be a trap, because I think that when you're building this out, especially when you're in half PPR, full PPR formats, and you've got 3 wide receivers starting, I think ideally the way that I want to build it out is really not have more than 6 or 7 wide receivers on my roster, and then just be able to lean into ideally a bench full of running backs. Now, a lot of people want to build that way, which makes it harder to do that. So I think that that factors in as well. You have to start looking at where the value might land on taking chances on some of those receivers. But I think a lot of times a deeper type receiver that's going to be on my roster, I want somebody with, I probably lean more towards, I want somebody with upside in a situation that could step in here. And then if really, I feel like it's really tough for me to buy into those players being producers year over year. So if they do produce, then I have trade bait, basically. I have trade chips that I can able to move in, and then constantly looking for, I think we had a really good opportunity with Malik Neighbors this past year of a player that you could buy as a potential injury discount. I think right now, from what I've seen in leagues that I'm operating in, you're starting to see Justin Jefferson or CD Lamb, because now they are age 27 and no longer age 26. And now they are aging in Dynasty, like opportunities for that. And so I think that having those players that can recognize some high value and even those splash weeks that can gain attention, or the period that we're in right now in training camp, those players that can generate training camp highlights and give you value windows off of that, I think is where I approach the deeper wide receivers on my roster.
Well, that's what we're going to be talking about primarily today, is how you build a wide receiver room. And while we'll be looking at it mostly through the lens of a startup draft, it still applies to any kind of a dynasty team, wherever you happen to be on your league journey. And we're also going to assume that you're either in a full PPR or a half PPR kind of format, because obviously if you are in what used to be known as the standard format or non-PPR, that changes the value calculation so much that what we're about to talk about is probably irrelevant, I would say, to that kind of a league. But, wide receivers, with the exception of people like Deebo Samuel, basically score points in only one way. They catch the ball. Running backs can score in basically 2 ways. They can run the ball and they can catch the ball. So how is it, Jeff, that you value wide receivers relative to running backs in Dynasty?
I think that, we already talked a little bit about scoring differences. There is full PPR, half PPR that accounts for some of those differences with the running backs. But I do think that the conversation gets lost a little bit when it comes down to looking at wide receivers versus running backs, because fragility is one thing that always gets talked about, or people you think you can bank on the health of running backs. And I think that that's half of the way to look at it. It's less that to me, it's more the replaceability is a big part of it, where you lose a wide receiver and like CeeDee Lamb gets hurt for the Cowboys. And yeah, George Pickens gets more targets, but really nobody else kind of steps up. And I think that that's whereas if you lose a starting running back, you know that they're going to plug another running back in there and he's going to get 10 to 15 to 20 touches that can recognize value. And so I think so often we get focused on not wanting to have running backs on our rosters because we're worried about running backs being injured more than wide receivers. When the reality of it is you have the receivers because when the running back does get hurt, that generates the value coming in off of the back end of it. So that's where I like to build heavier on wide receivers because everything's relative. As you look across your league, we are moving into a window now. We're seeing more bell cow running backs coming out of it. So that does dictate value a little bit there from where we were when running back groups were committees and this different hodgepodge of where these points were coming from. But having that solid base of wide receiver production allows you to have that flexibility of the running backs to be able to plug players in as the injuries arrive. Whereas with the wide receivers, you just don't see that much of the predictable replaceability.
Absolutely. If you're, for folks who are coming to Dynasty fairly recently and may have lived their lives in ESPN redraft leagues, you're probably used to seeing 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers as requirements in that starting lineup. But there are a whole lot of other configurations. I think, Jeff, I'm in a league that you and I are in a league you're a commissioner of, where I believe we can start 5 wide receivers and 2 running backs or something. I mean, we're required to start 5 and 2 or 5 and 3. So there's a whole kinds of ways you can balance these two out. Does the relative number of one versus the other in a starting lineup in terms of required slots, does that change your valuation of either running backs or wide receivers?
I don't know that I'm the right person to answer this question, to be honest, because I was somebody that even before I started playing Dynasty and even before it became trendy and before Sean Siegel did a lot of work on it, before Matt Waldman did a lot of work on it, I was somebody that would lean into a 0 running back build as it kind of came through and put value on those high-end wide receivers. And so that the starting number doesn't really dictate the way that I'm trying to build the roster out. I'm a Footballguys loyalist. I was a subscriber before I became a staff member, and value-based drafting, I think, is ingrained in my blood of what I'm trying to do. But I mean, you kind of, to some level, there's layers between value with the scoring, what your league dictates. There's values with internal value system of where you want to build in Dynasty. And that's where that kind of Dynasty becomes a little bit 3-dimensional in that way. But I wouldn't say that I necessarily decide how I'm going to build, because I'm just looking for value more often than not when it's coming to rosters. And I'm willing to live with some ugly spots in a roster if I like the other spots in the roster.
And I assume that's going to apply to your flex spots as well, whether there's 1 of them or 5 of them or 10 of them. So you're probably not mentally assigning those to positions. You're going more the VBD kind of direction, value-based drafting. Joe Bryant, the lead football guy, the architect of that style of drafting. So you think of this sort of mix of positions. Do you kind of reach a point where you think, man, I really should probably take one of these other positions? I've taken 7 straight wide receivers here because that's where the value's been. And I love this next wide receiver up here, but should I really go somewhere else here?
I would say if there's wide receivers that I love on the board, I'm probably going to take wide receivers. But then as we get through the back half of both rookie drafts and startup drafts, that's where I'll start to hammer the running back positions pretty heavily. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of liking the young athletic tight end that is like down the depth chart. And so that's something that you have to be cognizant of, I think, and fight a little bit against as you kind of going through, because if you don't, then all of a sudden you can be like, well, I have 7 tight ends on my roster. What am I doing here with these 7 tight ends? So I think that's where, when the positions come in of, to some level, I think there's a natural saturation point with wide receivers. So basically there's not any more, like I very much, it's hard to describe it, but it's like players that matter and players that don't. and I kind of know where the feel of where I'm deciding on players that matter and players that don't. When the wide receivers are off the board in that regard, then any running back could end up mattering.
Are there any particular rules or league settings in a dynasty league that would cause you to put another position ahead of wide receivers? It sounds like you're the in that pro hammer wide receivers early kind of camp. Is there something that would make you not do that?
I mean, certainly there are settings that can play into it, that, points per carry, those types of things that can just tilt the value equation so much that you need to get these running backs at this spot or you're going to be in trouble in this league. And you do have to look at it that way, because you can't count on filling it in the rookie draft necessarily, because if running backs are going to be valued heavily in the startup, they're also going to be valued heavily in the rookie draft. And what we saw last year with Jeremiah Love, what we saw with Bijan Robinson when he came out, what we saw with Ashton Genty is you can't get into that top spot. That running back is going to go there because that team was bad and they want that running back there. And so I do think to some regard, yeah, certainly you can get into situations where there's just going to be lack of balance in one way or the other. And I like more balance between the positions. And so like, I don't know. I mean, you play in a league like you said, that where I set it up so you start 2 running backs and 5 receivers, and to some regard, it's a 10-person league. It's a little bit of a smaller league, and we're just having a little bit of fun there in that regard. But I do think that and maybe it's because it's the height of charity draft season, but like we all want to be creative, but like it's a lot of work to be creative and to like balance out like these things. And to some regard, I would prefer my work is going to creating dynasty content and helping people win their dynasty leagues. I really struggle with management of some of my leagues, and a more bizarre league like that is like, you know what, I'm okay sitting this one out. Like I like to see that, but that's not a knock against. I've seen all kinds of different formats that home leagues or whatnot that they love them. It's just that to some regard, let's play a game one way, I guess.
I hear that. I don't think about how many leagues I'm in, but how many different rule sets and scoring rules are in place in all of those leagues. And I just got into the Raz Bowl this week, and it's starting. And like, oh, thank God, it's just a regular old league with plain old settings. It's very predictable in terms of what the valuations of players are going to be, and I could just draft like the old days of value-based drafting with no need to worry about, oh no, I need a 6th wide receiver over here, or I got to get 3 tight ends over there, or anything like that.
It's like going through it's like Alice in Wonderland, like going through the rabbit hole of like, as you get more and more involved in fantasy, it's like your mind expands and like, holy cow, there's so many different things to do and this direction. And then like, as you make it through that rabbit hole, you're kind of like, yeah, but like, I like doing this thing over here. That's pretty.
Yeah, it's nice. 3 receivers, 2 running backs, point per carry. I mean, point per reception. Love it. Just very nice and basic. So you mentioned, of course, 0 running back, which is one of the more famous strategies for drafting kind of anywhere. When you're looking at a startup draft, and you're thinking about the approaches for the wide receiver position, broadly, I see kind of 3, which is, you load it up, which I'd call the bully wide receiver. You get your wide receiver 1, and then you focus elsewhere, which would be the hero wide receiver. And then there are in some circumstances where you might want to go 0 wide receiver. I'm guessing you could have a hard time coming up with those circumstances, but that is nonetheless a strategy, especially if that's kind of the way the board's value is breaking. Then you have value-based drafting and probably some others. So let's kind of look at each one of those and talk about the pros and cons. How appealing is it, and then how happy are you when you use it? And we'll start with bully wide receiver. So this is probably getting 3 or 4 wide receivers with your first 4 picks in the draft. Why would you want to do that, and why would you not want to do that?
Well, I mean, one is a super flex league, because that dictates the conversation a little bit. And to some, I don't love really playing too risky with my quarterback 2 in super flex leagues. I feel like I'm old school in that regard to some ways, because it does seem like a newer school way of thinking in dynasty is the replacement ability of a quarterback too. Whereas,
Yep.
In like 2020 or so and 2019, like getting 2 elite quarterbacks was a pretty fun way to build a super flex team. But I think the bully wide receiver, I mean, you're insulating yourself with that nice solid base of wide receiver production there. You're not kind of hunting for these random one-offs to get into a lineup. And to some regard too, you're dictating the way the rest of the league has to play. And I think that I see it so often on you'll see people that they'll draft and they will not like their draft and they'll be really frustrated with the draft because basically they tried to take what the room was giving them versus being the person that's dictating the direction that the room is going to go. And so I think that really, you look at bully wide receiver, bully running back, any bully approach like that is you're bleeding out because you're having the expectation of like, well, so-and-so's got 2 running back spots filled and a flex filled. They're not going to take another running back. So I'm playing this game in my mind of what's going to be available on the board. And then they go and take a running back again. And you're like, oh, well, that shifted a whole lot. And that you have 11 other people in the league that are thinking that in the same regard. And so I think that getting that nice insulation of production out of the wide receiver position, and then also potentially dictating how others in your draft are going to spiral more or less and attack the situation in a way that they might not necessarily want to.
Yeah, there's always somebody on the board who's got that helplessness because everyone else has dictated a direction and they left with whoever's left. And it's a bad feeling to be that guy. If you've used bully tight end lately, how happy were you with what you ended up with at the end of the day? Did you like the drafts that you were getting? Did you wish you'd done something different, or say, you know what, I'll go to war with this?
Bully wide receiver.
Yep.
It's really like I wish we were talking about this in like April or like not April. I don't want to talk about anything.
Next year we will.
I mean, like early May, because like you run into August and like my brain is like very best ball brained right now on where ADP is landing, because I think so much of what I'm seeing off of ADP in best ball is, you get the 4th pick, you get Puka Nacua, and coming back, usually the running backs are off the board and you're taking a Drake London or something like that. And, if you wanted to go Malik Neighbors in round 3 or Rashee Rice in round 3, like something like that, and you're kind of, the values dictating that you go in that direction. And I'm fine with it, because I think it's so funny to me of the way that the conversation about the way running backs are getting pushed up the board and like the talk that's eliminating zero RB. And it's like, guys, you realize where zero RB started from. You used to, and Jeff, I know you remember when you would play fantasy and the first 15 picks would be running backs, and every single time, like without fail. And so that's where zero RB started. So the idea that running backs are going early is eliminating zero RB. No, it's creating the environment that allowed zero RB to be a functional strategy to approach it. But I think it does. I'm happy if depending on how it plays out. The problem that you run into, I think, with Dynasty is that middle tier of receiver, like the kind of the wide receiver 8 territory or so, starts to get a little bit iffy relative to your wide receiver like 15. I think that you start to blend a little bit there. And so I think that that's one knock against, if you're able to, on a turn or be leagues going running back heavy, things like that. And you've got a Puka Nacua and you've got another high end wide receiver there. Yeah, you'd be really happy with that strategy, but trying to chase it and ending up in a situation where you're forcing picks, I think it really gets you in trouble.
I'm trying desperately to remember, and I won't be able to while we're recording, but I'm sure I'll remember at 4 a.m. later tonight. I won't call you and tell you. But I just remember being in a draft and watching people walk up and put running back stickers on the board. And we get to around pick number 9, and somebody stuck a wide receiver up there, and it was an audible gasp from the room that someone was doing that.
Yeah.
I don't remember if that dude ended up winning the title or not, but it was just sort of okay, there's a contrarian viewpoint here. That's kind of interesting. The rest of us are all drafting almost identically. Running backs the top, then we'll do the wide receivers, then we'll pick up a tight end, then another running back, and then we'll find the quarterback around round 10 or so. Because that's where they lived back in those days.
There were times like early 2000s, you could do you'd get a top 4 running back, and then you would still get 2 top 5 wide receivers at the second and third round, because that's just the way that it would go. And it was like I had a light bulb moment when I realized that of like these leagues, and it was like, holy cow, you mean to tell me I can get Steve Jackson and also get Reggie Wayne and Randy Moss here? And why am I not doing that every single time that I'm doing a draft?
Right. Well, let's shift over a little bit to what I would call like the hero wide receiver. The hero RB is where I'm getting this from. That's where the term is more likely used, where you're going to get your top wide receiver in the first round, and then you're going to pivot to some other positions first. And I think particularly when we're talking Superflex, that some form of this has to happen. If you don't want to leave round 3 without a quarterback, you have to take some kind of a hero approach with at least one other position. What's your thought on hero wide receiver as a tactic? And feel free to split between Superflex and 1QB, because I think that's radically different here for those two different leagues when it comes to this strategy.
Yeah, so I do think, like, I want to take a quick detour, and imagine that I want to take a quick detour out of doing a show, but like I think where people get in trouble with these strategies is deciding, well, I'm building a 0 RB team. And I'm of the belief that like 0 RB just happens to you. You don't intend to build one certain direction. You lean into, and it all stems out of value-based drafting to some regard, but you're leaning into where the value in the draft is dictating you go. And it's funny to me of like setting out to draft 0 RB, to me, is just setting out to draft a bad team. I don't know why you would do that. Whereas when you look back and say, oh, this ended up as a 0 RB team, or, okay, well, I've gone no running backs in the first 8 picks now because of the way that the values dictated. Now I'm going to hammer these profiles of the way that I build a 0 RB team. Like that's how to approach strategies, I think, when it comes down to it. But ultimately, when you're looking at the hero wide receiver, the hero RB build, you're solving one position, and you're willing to live with the variability, the uncertainty of the other positions. So you're locking in, be it a hero RB, be it a hero wide receiver. I know that my wide receiver 1, I've got Puka Nacua. I'm starting him every single week. I don't need to worry about that. Just take that off the board. Now I need to solve these other 2 wide receiver positions is what you're doing with that hero strategy. And I mean, again, I think if the value dictates it, I think any strategy is fine if the value dictates it. It's just that when you say, I'm drafting a 0 RB team, I'm not going to take Josh Jacobs here because I'm drafting a 0 RB team. And it's like, well, no, that's not exactly what you should be doing.
How that works. Yeah. Yeah. I know. I guess I'm a little weird in that I just kind of don't have a particular strategy in mind, or one I want to go with in the first 3 or 4 rounds of the draft. I kind of want to see how value is being dictated, see if I can take charge of value, as you say, if I can create a run on a position when it comes to me. Part of that's just where did I fall among the 10 or 12 or 14 picks in a round. But by about the 4 or 5 turn, I've got a pretty good idea of where this is going. But I'm like you too. I mean, if I'm thinking, okay, I'm not really going to draft a running back here, I'm going to do this value, and you've got a bell cow adjacent back falling into the 5th round, it's really hard not to just do that, right? I mean, he's right there for the picking.
And I think one of the things that I think everybody wants to move back, because it's been established that moving back and getting more value is the smart thing to do. But like, it's like one of those things of the market's inefficient. The market's not operating properly, because it's like everybody wants to move back, but they want the price of like everybody wanting to move up, basically. Right. And so like, I see when the startups that I've done, I've only done 2 startups this year. I try really hard not to do startups in the off season, because you can end up in too many leagues way too quickly. But what I've seen is just a lack of movement early, because it's the 2 sides of one coin. It's that everybody wants to move back, but in the market, nobody's recognizing that everybody wants to move back, because hypothetically, if you're in a situation where everybody wants to move back and everybody should recognize that, then the price to move up should be much lower, because if everybody's trying to do this thing, then you should be willing to accept that. But instead we get stuck into, well, the trade chart says it should be this, or the established value, or I want your 27 first before I'm going to pretend to do anything. And when
you can't have that.
That's the other part that we run into is when you run into those classes, like the 27 class, the 23 class, an example of that, it's like a non-starter on everybody just wants that 27 first. It's like nobody can move their mind past that object because everything you want that 27 first, no matter what you do. And then the other side of it, you just run into being stuck in negotiations so often. And what I see, I think, in startups.
Yeah, I've run into that myself where I would be willing to move up, but I'm not going to pay the kind of price. I'm always going to give value to move up, but I'm not going to
in the group chat that you want to move down. You've been doing that for 2 hours. You know the offers aren't coming in. If you want to move down, here's the price. Like that's the way a market should work. But like Dynasty is so weird in regards to, and that's where I end up getting a lot of deals done because like I'm willing to probably accept below market potentially, but I'll recognize like my motivation in this is outside of what a chart dictates the value is. I want to get off this player because I don't believe in him, so I'm going to get off of him, or like those types of things of being willing to be flexible in that approach.
Yeah, it's like I'm sitting here in this position, and the best value out here is Rashee Rice, and I do not want that man on my team. Maybe somebody else does, and I'm with you. I may take a lower than market return to just not have to do that, but also not have to take the guy next that's a definite tier down from there. I can move backwards, hopefully, and get somebody out of that same tier and maybe pick up somebody's third in 2027. And you can have Rashee Rice and have fun with that. He'll either win you the league or he'll give you 0. It's kind of that, one or the other. But as you're looking at your wide receiver room, Jeff, what does an ideal room look like to you? If you've got your dynasty roster, whether we're talking startup, whether you've been doing it for 10 years in the same league, whether you just got an orphan, whatever it is, what does an ideal wide receiver room look like for you?
I mean, if you've played Dynasty and you're playing aggressively over a number of years, the problem with Dynasty is dynasties, basically, because you run into a situation where, like, I've got teams where I've got Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, and CD Lamb. And so, like, if you're to ask me what my ideal team looks like, it's like, well, I do have this team over here that does have Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, and Malik Neighbors as the 3 wide receivers. So, but that's probably my ideal room of as we're looking at Dynasty. But that's what's in play in Dynasty, and that's really what you're trying to build. I mean, having at least 2 elite guys, I think, is an ideal room of what you're looking for. And then as you're building it out, like if I'm coming out of a startup, I'm in a startup right now, having 2 elite guys at the top and then having young players that can become an elite player, or young players that will give me an entry into getting that 3rd elite player. Because then, like, once you have, you're going to start 3, once you can lock in those top 3, then it's like almost the infinity gauntlet is built here. And now I can do the other things that I want to do. So I think a lot of where it comes down is going to be acquisition cost, on less like what profile you're looking at and more the acquisition cost that you're paying for that profile, and being willing to dynasty leagues that have 29 players on a roster and 12-team league, that you can pick up, if you can pick up a guy that could hit your lineup for nothing, then you've done something good there. And so I think it's less probably on an overall ideal mix and more what's the acquisition cost to be able to have options that as we step into buys or injuries.
Do you think that if you've gotten your couple of elite guys at the top, does that make you more willing to take chances on upside down the wide receiver room later on, or are you still looking at, let me just keep banking this position with as many points as I can up top?
No, I firmly believe that there's a wide receiver cliff, and I'm trying to get as many guys out as before that cliff hits, because once it does hit, then you're really starting to step into some speculative plays. And I think that, be it your rookie drafts, be it your startup draft, you're going to run into that in any format. And yeah, there are players that come out of that surprise, but it's like outliers versus being churning running backs, those types of things, that you guys that you're able to plug in, Emmanuel Wilson here for a week or things like that.
Yeah, it's a big difference between an outlier performance being you scored 3.6 points and an outlier performance being you scored 23.6 points.
Yeah.
And you definitely it's nice to have some of the latter, but you really need some of the former to make this work as a dynasty and to be consistently at the top, to be going to the north, as we use in our compass metaphor here. That's where the perennial contenders are moving. But if you were you're now drafting, you're in a startup, you are looking at selecting those wide receivers, and we've talked a little bit about it at the top. I mean, you're trying to super flex aside where you may be trying to lock your quarterbacks down. You're also really trying to get those elite top guys right off the bat. When are you, let's assume those are then your wide receiver 1 and your wide receiver 2. When do you start looking for your wide receiver 3, your 4, your 5, maybe your 6, maybe more, depending on how many you've got to play?
Always, Jeff. Always keeping the eyes peeled for him. But no, it really, again, like I can just hit value-based drafting on all of it, and it is defining your own values that you're looking for. But I mean, I'm an ageist. I like young players when I'm doing a startup, because more often than not, yeah, sometimes you're going to be wrong, but sometimes you're going to be very right. And that's where, like I said, like these dynasties get generated because you took a chance on Puka Nacua, or you did move that direction. You got it right. So really, I mean, it's looking to be in a startup. Like my teams, more often than not, my running back position looks like garbage my first year in a dynasty league, and I'm perfectly fine. It is, that's the other funny thing of, like, I'm perfectly fine getting the second pick in year 1 because I've drafted a young roster out of the startup, and I'm going to build that way. But you get into these 27 classes where just people lose their mind, and like somebody posted like a link for a tool from Dynasty or whatnot, like that had team values and everything. And there was one team way down here, and they like, I looked at the roster, and it's like they had like Jackson Dart and an additional 27 first. And I was like, well, where were the rest of your pieces? Like what happened here? Like, and I think that you do run into that with these classes of people move so hard in wanting to be at the top of that class that Jeremiah Smith should be pretty awesome, but the number 3 and the number 4 pick in that rookie class is still going to probably be pretty good if we're moving that way. But it's so hard to build out of that way, and I do think that people get too extreme in clearing the deck, and a whole bunch of seconds isn't going to do much for you.
I think that's a really excellent point, Jeff, and one that we kind of lose sight of sometimes, is that which positions are the hardest to build via a rookie draft, because you have to hit more often than not on some positions than others. Mm-hmm. In my mind, if you've got 2 or 3 elite wide receivers on your roster today, you really only have to hit on another one sometime in the next 4 seasons or so. And that makes a big difference in needing to hit on 2 of them in 2027 and 1 in 2028 to become competitive. And, you and I, being who we are and in the industry we work in, and with Footballguys, the firm we work for, we're pretty good at rookie evals. At least I think we are. At least I think I am. I know you are. And so I think we are a little bit better able to lean into that rookie evaluation process to build. But for a manager that's not glued to, or I mean, how many wide receivers did you scout? Like 83 or something like that originally, before you had to cut it down to a more manageable 60 something for the rookie guide, or whatever those numbers were. For anyone who doesn't have time to do that, building through the rookie drafts can be daunting if you don't have some elite wide receivers up front. So if you're starting from 0 and you're building, when do you start really getting really antsy that you don't have your wide receiver 1 and your wide receiver 2 locked down?
When they're off the board, yes, to some regard. I mean, like we're dealing with finite resources here. It's like, I can't build a log cabin if all the logs have been claimed, like at some regard. So, I mean, it's probably less like the dictating my roster and with the available resources that you can. Again, there's only so many logs to build this cabin that we're trying to build here, and everybody wants them. So, I mean, it is playing those tiers and and just looking at it that regard of how many is left in the tier. Is it going to make it to me? Do I need to make a move here? And how do I position myself to clean out this tier if possible? And just kind of flexibility in that approach to some regard. But also, I mean, again, there's only so many resources. And yeah, I mean, I could talk myself into Tetero and McMillan being my wide receiver 1, but I also don't know that I'm going to win any championships anytime soon if Tetero and McMillan's my wide receiver 1 on this roster.
What are you looking for? I mean, aside from, I would like to have CeeDee Lamb as my wide receiver 3, which it sounds like you do on one of your teams. That would be an ideal wide receiver 3. Yeah. But what are you generally looking for in your wide receiver 3 position on your roster, whether they're your starting wide receiver or whether they're going to be a starting flex for you?
So I think that like Jameson Williams is my ideal wide receiver 3, because Jameson Williams, I value him as a top 15 wide receiver. The production the last year especially has put him in that regard, but the consensus on the market views him more as like a low-end wide receiver 2. And so finding a player where there's that difference in consensus that's viewed kind of as that low-end wide receiver 2, but has the top 15 ceiling, I think it would be the ideal wide receiver 3 when you're looking at a build and talking about a half PPR or full PPR format. Because I think wide receiver heavy builds are really fun, but if it's no PPR, it goes back to your very first question on running backs being able to score 2 different ways. And I mean, I've seen that before too. And it's funny because we're backed off like the 0 RB talk of like 2 summers ago, basically. But I played fantasy for a long time, and that same talk was about like 2016. It was all like got to be 0 RB builds. You got to have these wide receivers. And I remember I was invited, my very first industry league then was an auction, and I just bought 4 high-end running backs, and I just got roasted in the group chat, and I won the league because I had Ricky Odell Beckham, and like I just bowling balls at a running back that just dominated in that regard. But it really does come down to, I think, looking at, I think so often where I like to end up is looking at, have we taken too strong a stance of this player where we could be wrong, and has that built upon itself to drive him down within the market value? Does he has production in the past, his profile, Jameson Williams being a top 12 pick and producing as a high-end wide receiver previously, and having still that view, that volatility around him, I think makes him an ideal wide receiver 3. But also you look at the good side of a Jameson Williams, that ceiling being there of any week, you get that score from that wide receiver 3 that can push you to winning your week because that player was in your lineup.
How would you feel about him as your wide receiver 2?
I would prefer he's my wide receiver 3, but you can live with
I prefer he's my wide receiver 5, but I don't get that.
Yes. No, I mean, in ideally, hypothetically, you're looking at that as you've built strength throughout the rest of your roster that's going to allow him to be in that role where, and we're talking about a volatile player in that regard, but really just kind of looking for that profile of that low end wide receiver 2 in the market that has potential to be a wide receiver 1. Yeah, you should be happy with that as your wide receiver 2 in a lot of different formats and builds. But it is just depends on how you're trying to build strength throughout your roster.
When do you get comfortable with high volatility? Where on the pecking order of your wide receivers do you get to the point where you're willing to take a low floor game for the high ceiling game and not know what that might be from week to week?
Well, I mean, there's like Adonai Mitchell. I don't know that I want to have Adonai Mitchell in my starting lineup too often, unless like situation. So but at the same time, like volatility in wide receivers is something that doesn't scare me at all. It's Jeff, you know who the most consistent wide receiver was last year?
The guy who didn't score any points.
Jacoby Myers was the most consistent wide receiver
Okay.
last year.
He actually did score points, so that's good.
Yeah. So, and I got that off of Tristan Cockcroft had done an article about consistency on ESPN towards the end of last year, and Jacoby Myers graded out as the most consistent wide receiver. And the reason why Jacoby Myers was the most consistent wide receiver was as much avoiding the low end as it was not having the high ends.
Right.
And you look at a player. I've been on this all off season. I know you crushed the spotlight work that you did with Jason, but I did a spotlight early in the off season on Jameson Williams. And one of the things that I looked at in Jameson Williams is the conversation around him being a boom bust player. And the reality of it is Jameson Williams, he's not really any more boom bust than most wide receivers. It's just that the bust so hard. It's that you're ready for Jameson Williams to take off, and he has a 2-game PED suspension out of nowhere. You're ready for Jameson Williams to take off, and here's the 0, right when Dan Campbell's talking about how important he is. Like that, like Jameson Williams, it goes back to, I mean, we're doing a wide receiver show. I feel like it's impossible not to mention Matt Harmon, who's been a mentor for me, but Matt Harmon talking about when you're prospecting, when you're watching film, and you can be watching a receiver and that first drop comes up on that film and everybody goes to their spreadsheet and notes a drop or notes concentration drops, whatever else it might be, because the bad is so extreme that it outweighs the volatility in Jameson Williams. If it wasn't random PED suspensions and zeros out of nowhere, if it was just like 4 points here, then like CeeDee Lamb has weeks where he has 3 or 4 points. Like every wide receiver does. And so I think that's where that 0 is just so painful when you're looking at in your lineup, because you're looking at literally anybody else I could put in here. And especially if you lost a close game, 0. I mean, that 3 hurts you just as much as that 0 does, but it doesn't feel the same when it comes into the mental side of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's you hear Dan Campbell say how important Jameson Williams is to the offense, and then you watch the defense rub him completely off the field because that's the way they chose to play it. And there's really nothing you can do. I mean, Jamar Chase gets 2 points every once in a while.
Yeah.
Puka Nacua gets 2 points every once in a while. I mean, the idea of a safe floor is really a myth. But I do love that you brought up Jacoby Myers. I was being flippant when I said it was the guy who didn't score any points, because that's real consistency right there, just this flat 0 everywhere. Yeah. But, you know, having a floor guy and that's it with no boom doesn't really do a lot for you in most formats, unless we are talking about conceivably a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4, where you just know you're going to bank 12 points and that's that. And if that's what you need, that's what you need. So I don't know if that would be, you know, if a Jacoby Myers type is, you know, what would you call like an ideal wide receiver 4 if you're looking for a steady floor there, or are you already trying to find upside and you're willing to say, you know what, if he gets a 0, he gets a 0?
I would rather have a guy like Omar Cooper than like Jacoby Myers, of basically, like, again, like just building through youth, building, and really it comes down to looking at profiles on, and I think a lot of my work through the rookie guide, what I'm looking for is profiles of this is the profile that works within an NFL passing attack, or this, if this player realizes his ceiling, that's what it's going to look like in an NFL passing attack. And so a guy like Dante Thornton last summer, everybody was really excited about Dante Thornton last summer about running with the ones, but it's like, if you scheme this out, like what's Dante Thornton doing running with the ones? He's running a straight line down the field and a defender's going with him, and like the ball's not going with him. Like that. That's what
running a lot of cardio.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and yeah, I mean, Jacoby Myers is a player that I would take a lot, like when he was a couple years ago, just because I think when you're looking at the pecking order of where he stood with the Raiders passing attack, where the value was relative to the market, that there's opportunity there, but it's one that, again, you're just trying to marry the opportunity. You're trying to marry the cost that's going to be involved in it. You're trying to look at profiles of where a player fits within a passing attack, and where can consistent, predictable volume come from. And is this player good enough that if the value is going to be there, he can actually do something with it?
That is also, and with Jacoby Myers, I guess I didn't mean him specifically as much as that sort of very steady kind of player, because yes, I would prefer a much younger asset to Jacoby Myers too, if given the choice between them, and I think Cooper's a good option there. But let's look a little deeper, and we're now into deep rounds, which for Dynasty leagues can mean all sorts of things. It could mean rounds 12 and on. It could mean rounds 25 and on. What are kind of your ideal deep round or last round wide receivers? What do they look like, and how many of them do you want? I think you said earlier you really don't want more than 6 or 7 wide receivers on your team. I guess if you have a bench of 40 people, that number shifts a little bit.
Yeah.
But what's an ideal dart throw for you in the last rounds of a dynasty startup?
So like that, Adonai Mitchell would be an ideal dart throw there, where he has. It's kind of, he's been forgotten about as a player, like Keon Coleman is a type of like late last round dart throw type player where there's draft capital there. The early part of their career hasn't gone the way that we would like it to go. But at the same time, you can look at the skill set that they're offering and what they bring in, and you can profile it into, this is where it fits within this receiver room. And I'm the type that, especially in startups, I'm willing to take a chance on the Matthew Golden, on the Keon Coleman, on those types of players, because relative to taking the steady Eddie vet that might be sitting there, or if I know that Keon Coleman flames out this year, I'm just cutting him and I'm moving on. But I know if it hits, the Bills figure out a first round pick. I've got a first round pick that got figured out with Josh Allen, or early second round pick that got figured out with Josh Allen playing quarterback. Like that's the type of, and kind of avoiding probably situational traps that, if it's going to be like, Jalen Coker's not a good example for it, but like a player that's just going to be, even if they hit, they're not hitting in regard that is going to change the value dramatically that they're offering onto your roster.
Okay. Let's shift our attention. We've been talking about startups, but I mean, everything we've talked about applies whether you are just now building it from scratch or if you've got a roster that's already constructed and you're trying to figure out how to improve it. But let's look specifically at upgrading or rebuilding your wide receiver room. Hopefully you're upgrading it. If you're rebuilding it, this could be painful for a while, because as we mentioned earlier, trying to hit on multiple elite wide receivers in rookie drafts is not easy to do. But how would you go about correcting holes or deficiencies in your wide receiver room? Let's kind of start with a lack of elite talent. Everyone is okay. They have good floors. They put up good numbers. They're pretty consistent, but no one's putting the fear into an opponent's heart. No one's afraid to face your receivers. How do you go about, first of all, do you go about fixing that? And secondly, how do you go about fixing that?
I mean, you're just going to have to take chances. We're not talking tight ends, but like I traded DK Metcalf for a pick that ended up being Brock Bowers. And so it took a risk on trading DK Metcalf for a draft pick at a time when he was valued still slightly high, and it turned into Brock Bowers taking a risk in that regard, probably on being able to hit on a profile like Brian Thomas or a later receiver like that is one way that you can go about fixing it. One way is make it so bad that you just get Jeremiah Smith is one way you can go about fixing it. And I think it really just comes down to, at some level, you're going to have to take a level of risk to be able to fix situations like that. Or, I mean, I'll lean into the value that's going to be given to me because situation dictates to that value and try to hit it that way. I think is probably the other way. But I think it really, you're always looking for the buying windows, for those opportunities of Malik Neighbors jogs funny at a softball game and everybody else has nothing to do on Twitter. And so you go buy Malik Neighbors at that time. Rashee Rice does something dumb and you offer for Rashee Rice that day. And I think that looking at, basically, it's like the old Warren Buffett of it. When everybody's running away from a situation, that's when you buy. And when everybody is all in on it, of a guy like Josh Downs or something like that, it's like, maybe the market's tipping a little bit far this direction on where I should dictate this move. But really, probably just, embracing risk, I think, is the way that you fix it. Either troubled situations, injuries, or through rookie picks is really the only way that you can go about fixing it. But, and I think I love when we get into, point scoring season leading into the dynasty, but like you get that player that's injured, and especially, if you have more inexperienced managers, that player's hurt, they're fighting for the 5th or 6th playoff spot, and they recognize that I'm not getting any production here, and it's like, oh, he can come on my roster here, and just kind of, but being willing to embrace those risks when people are running away.
Yeah, I will take on broken toys. I like broken toys in my leagues and on my teams, because they may never become what they were before, but they're going to become a lot more than the guy I just shipped to you because you needed production now. Yeah. And I don't, because I am trying to get Jeremiah Smith. There's a whole episode we did about how to tank without tanking. So follow those strategies, and Jeremiah Smith can be yours too. But I do love that you mentioned that you traded Metcalf for a pick that became Brock Bowers. So you didn't get the elite wide receiver, but you still got an elite talent. And it is almost myopic if we're thinking, you've got to have elite wide receivers. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you just need elite other positions, and maybe that's one of the ways out of the box. Is you need a certain number of them, basically, elite players on your roster to be competitive year after year in Dynasty. Kind of doesn't matter where they are as long as they're elite and they're scoring on a weekly basis and they stay healthy.
Yeah, and I think that's one area that I just did. Jacob Sanderson was on the Dynasty show last week, and Jacob's one of the smartest people in the fantasy space. I love talking theory with him, and Adam Harstad was on earlier, and just talking about liquidity and where they're willing to go in a rebuild to get like very liquid in a rebuild. I do think that if you're experienced to that regard, sure, but I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, of getting super liquid and then you really get stuck into perpetual rebuilding situations.
Yeah.
Whereas tearing it down, I've had my most success on rebuilds of basically like these are my 4 high value players over here. I'm either going to try to tear down to a younger player of similar production, or I'm sitting these 4 over here, and I'm going to do. Jacob had a really good analogy of talking about basically like if you want to make $100 and you have $60 and you put $20 on the mattress, now you all of a sudden you have to make $60 instead of $40. And I get that thinking. I do get that thinking. And I think if you're experienced, that is the way they approach it. But I think that if you are kind of new to this or leaning into the known a little bit and recognizing that, hey, if you have 3 really good players and the rest of your team is pretty bad, that can still get you the number 1 pick, and it can still put Jeremiah Smith into it. And all of a sudden you're putting Jeremiah Smith into a pretty good situation, and building that way and layers on top of that can be a pretty quick way to rebound what feels like a very stuck situation.
I like thinking that way because, I view some of those kinds of elite players as the cornerstones, or the people that if you put out marketing materials for your fantasy team, these would be the faces that are on it.
Yeah.
And you have this desire to build around them, but they are also the most valuable pieces that you have. And if you can turn one of those into, as you say, tearing down to younger assets that are producing, maybe not quite at that level, but somewhere in there, maybe get some additional draft capital, you hit on a couple of those, you can turn a cornerstone into, 3 starters essentially in your lineup if you do it right. But I also love the idea of you just don't keep perpetually rebuilding. If you keep trading your cornerstones away, you become the Miami Marlins of your fantasy league, where you develop your guys, you get to the end of the rookie contract, you trade them away, and you repeat and you repeat and you repeat. And every once in a while you win the World Series, and the rest of the time you don't make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I see in that. So have that willingness to trade them, but don't be dead set on it either. I mean, just kind of figure out where the value is. And like I said, you can have 2 very elite players in your lineup and still finish 3-11 and get the number 1 pick.
And I think something that I see in content quite often is like throwing out the idea. I mean, just tear off of Jamar Chase for Puka Nacua in our first, and it's like, okay,
yeah, I would do that.
But
I'll do that in a heartbeat. Yeah,
I I did a thread, like I think it was either last summer or the summer before, where like I went out to like the trade database and Keep Trade Cut, and basically I started with Jamar Chase, and I was like, well, you can trade Jamar Chase for Puka Nacua in a first, and then you can trade Puka Nacua for CeeDee Lamb in a first, and then you can trade CeeDee Lamb for Jamar Jefferson in a first, and then all of a sudden you can have 8 firsts, and here's this trade where somebody traded Brian Thomas Jr. and 2 seconds and a first for Jamar Chase, so you can actually just trade Jamar Chase for Jamar Chase and 7 first round picks if you do it this way. But I think
Perfect.
yes, exactly. But no, I think the practicality of, I think it's really hard to tear down without tearing down, but also getting a meaningful asset. I don't think happens too often, but I do feel like sometimes I love getting trades. Listeners send their trades in and ask for an opinion on it. But it's like, to some regard, it's like, are you doing this because you're bored and you want to do a dynasty trade, or are you trying to get some value here? Because it really feels like you're bored.
Yeah, that's I always say it's the number one mistake that dynasty managers make, is they make moves without having a strategy in place. And being bored is not a strategy.
Yeah.
And I've watched lots of teams spin their wheels because May comes around, the draft is over, the rookie draft is over. It's been 2 weeks since anything's happened, and you get some itchy trigger fingers, and you get all sorts of weird trade offers that come along and that kind of thing. Let's take a situation, though, where we've got a couple of elite guys at the top of our roster, and then there's this just big drop off to everybody else. So that if one of our guys is on bye or injured, we don't have a lot of firepower to put in there. What are you looking for there, and how do you try to go about and fix that situation? What's the fix you're looking for?
Well, I said go lean into risk when you want to rebuild a room, and Jeff, this is going to be a shocking answer. Lean into risk to build it. I really just do think, really in Dynasty especially, I mean, you just run into, if you've played fantasy football for a period of time, or if you are involved in social media, the oh my God, Rashee Rice is going to prison for the next 15 years. It's like, okay, well, Henry Ruggs happened, sure.
Yeah.
But for the most part, these guys, like, their careers are not instantly over in that regard. And so I think that really probably, if you want to add value onto your roster, regardless of you want it to be your wide receiver 1 or you want it to be your wide receiver 5, embracing a risk is the surest way to potentially add value. Sure, you might strike out, but at the same time, you could trade for a known quantity and still strike out. I mean, there were Michael Thomas, my home league, we went to Dynasty in 2020, and Michael Thomas went like 5th or 6th in the startup draft, and he was done, and nobody knew it. Or Juju Smith-Schuster was the wide receiver 1 in Dynasty around that same time period, and Juju Smith-Schuster was done. You could be going for what you think is locked in, sure, elite players and still be wrong. I'd rather be wrong on not having to pay too much and being wrong, and it works out this way. But we talked about floor early in this episode, and you made a really good point on the most consistent players is 0. I've been on the floor for everybody is a 0. The floor for everybody is a Tashard choice. I vividly remember it's got to be Tashard choice because it is in my mind now at this point. But running back for the Cowboys, starting a spot start and fumbling the first touch and then being benched the rest of the game and posting like -2. And it's like, that's the floor for everybody. So
that's the floor. Yeah, that is the absolute floor. Yes. Yeah, you don't, or they come in and throw an interception on the one pass that they do. There are some negatives out there. How about let's take it as or whether we have elite people or not, they are the types of just boom bust kind of elite, and then you've just got lots of high ceiling and lots of low floor. Do you just lean into that high ceiling, low floor and hope that it works out in your favor, or do you try to shore up a little bit of floor in there somewhere?
I lean into it, to be honest. I really don't stress floor too much. I mean, I'm trying, to some regard, I'm trying to start the best player every week. Whether it be a dictated via matchup or injury creates a situation, I'm trying to start the best player every week. And so as part of that is leaning into the volatility probably a little bit on, I really like this matchup here, even if the other things don't dictate that they might be super involved. I think that in any game mode that you're playing, and I think that this is one thing that I'm really big on through Dynasty, that playing other ways of fantasy really can help you to fill out a lineup, to look at different profiles. And I host the DFS show, and I remember when I got into DFS around 2015, how it just dramatically altered my thinking on 1 week matchup, basically. Yeah. On the price, and it used to be like, why would you not start the 5 guys that are highest in consensus ranks? Right. And it's like, well, because I want to win this week, and I think this guy's going to score more points. But I do think that playing Dynasty, or playing Dynasty and then moving that over to redraft, you're more dialed in on the rookies that could step up, or the young players, or recognizing the way that young players ascend in redraft. Or playing DFS opens you up to understanding the defensive matchup on the other side, and understanding that, yeah, you might have the Andre Johnson, but if he's going against, I forget the corner that shut him down like every time. There was one guy that had him, or Mike Evans and Marcus Lattimore. It's like, sure, you can risk here with Mike Evans actually having his first good game ever against Marcus Lattimore, or you can just play this guy over here that is probably going to score more points. And so I think just being willing but looking for the best play that week individually.
We as dynasty managers look, years ahead, sometimes as many as 5 or 6 years out. Sometimes forget that this is still a weekly game, that the only thing you can win is what's right in front of you, and it is a weekly lineup. And that dynasty rankings are fine for, looking at trades and trying to evaluate future moves, but they're useless in a weekly game. You need to go over to the weekly rankings, or pay attention to what's going on DFS and where people are fading players and not fading players. That some of these other formats have a lot of information that dynasty managers can be utilizing, and seeing kind of where those rankings are different from each other provides opportunities for you to really get some value that your other league mates are not paying attention to, because they are not looking at what's going on in DFS if they don't play it.
Yeah, and I think that's making Dynasty content. We're starting to get into the point of the year where it can be really hard to make Dynasty content during the season, not differentiate from redraft content, basically, right, on the situation here. And so, but playing those other modes of fantasy and just learning, and I mean, try IDP and you learn what corners to avoid or whatnot. You can learn a lot from going in different directions.
Well, let's look at one other kind of scenario in terms of a rebuilding process for you. And this is what I'd call the cupboard is bare. You picked up an orphan, their wide receiver one. Maybe it's Chris Godwin. Maybe it's Quentin Johnson. Maybe it's Michael Wilson. Maybe it's Michael Thomas. How do you start picking up the pieces from just a wide receiver room that is useless?
Draft Jeremiah Smith. I mean,
well, yes,
to some, but I mean, it is like, to some regard of you're playing Dynasty, and I guess to some regard of, I guess, what's your goal? Probably as part of it is the situation that you just want to try to win right now, because I mean, yeah, there are avenues towards going out and getting a Devontae Adams, or going out and I usually like to do those avenues with Derrick Henry, basically, of like, yeah, I'll wait till the team that's losing and they need to get Derrick Henry off for something, or like a player like that. But I mean, that's certainly not a way to play it, I guess, to some regard. I don't love advising that, because I think it leads into basically people exacerbating the problem and making it like even worse, because they're trying to play it as redraft, and then they realize, well, that didn't work, and also now I don't have anything on this team at all. And so that's where I think, to some regard, if you're really truly playing Dynasty, I mean, you got to tank, I think, to some regard, on fixing some of those long-term problems. And you've got to try to, it can be kind of fun to think, because the pressure's off to some regard, but also it opens you up to having more flexibility and being able to take more chances and cycling players through on a roster. The problem that you run into, though, with situations like that, again, is a dynasty where you've probably, if the team's that bad, and there's probably another team in the league that's bad, there's only so many good players. There's only so many top 60 players. And more often than not, you've got one or two of those teams that have consolidated those assets to be able to put those other players in that position. And you're stepping into, you kind of have to lean into the time frame a little bit on hit those early picks, get that good basis, and then build the value up from that point. And it's, I think it's so interesting where we are now with Dynasty, because it's changed a lot, like in the last 5 years and before that. And it used to, when I first started playing Dynasty, it baffled me because you would have the 28-year-old, the 29-year-old star receiver would get traded for a first round pick and an established young player. And it's like, isn't this going backwards a little bit on like where this pick is landing? But the way that it was rookie picks were viewed as more of a chance, less of a guaranteed thing, and less of immediate production. You had to use that rookie pick and still wait 2 years to see if that player is actually going to be good. I mean, Derrick Henry, again, is an example of that. He didn't do much. People were writing him off before he really clicked in and became this player that we know. And then it was really around 2020, 21, where you had the 21 class, Jamar Chase coming in, Justin Jefferson in the 20 class, like changing and producing immediately at unheard of levels. And then Puka Nacua coming in 23 on top of it. And so I think that you ran into that, creating the situation where those picks became that much more valuable and that much harder to acquire.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of hit that. It's really funny what trades we used to make because we didn't value those rookie picks in quite the same way. And we still run into that because people in different leagues and different situations do value their picks differently. They are an asset, I think, it's even more volatile and more capable of swinging value-wise, depending on who's holding it, than even the players do. Because the players at least have some sort of track record of production. But the picks are just chances, really, at potential future production, which could come next year, or it could come 3 years from now, or it could come never.
Yeah,
and that's chances. I think for me, the key, and it's been a theme that's woven through this, even if we haven't used the exact words, or it's just have conviction and then follow that and do that. And yes, you're going to be wrong, probably a lot, but if you take enough good, educated chances, you're going to be right enough to make that work. And then you just really kind of at that point need one more to work for you, and you are a contending team. Even if you start with a cupboard that's bare in wide receivers, you just may not be a contending team this year, but you just need to string a few things together. You don't have to get everything right and be perfect about everything. If you take a step backwards, fine. It means you get the Jeremiah Smith of 2030. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Exactly. Having that flexibility and leaning into, but really everything is about value and being able to take the risk to capitalize on the value.
What would you say, Jeff, what would you say is the biggest mistake that dynasty managers make when they're trying to upgrade their wide receiver rooms?
Biggest mistake that the biggest hypothetical on paper, the biggest mistake is trading a first round pick to go from Puka Nacua to Jamar Chase is probably just about the biggest mistake that you can make. And I think the other part of it is when you get these 27 classes and liquidating it to the level that you can't even rebuild off of it to some regard too. But I think it's probably playing for the now too much and not recognizing that there is ways that you can play for the now without playing for the now too much. It probably looking at it that way of being willing to, if you've got this hole here, not trying to throw 3 first round picks and whatever else to definitively solve it, but you go out and get Devontae Adams and you're putting him into your starting lineup weekly, a big upgrade there in that regard. And so I think it's, and overall, I think the biggest mistake I think right now of what we're seeing in Dynasty is the 27 class is just blowing things up and making people inflexible on what you're trying to do, and not recognizing the other part of it, I think, too, is a situation where, like, Ramondre Stevenson, what's the long-term value on Ramondre Stevenson versus if you've got somebody coming and you've got a hole at their running back too, and they're trying to solve that hole, like not trying to sell Ramondre Stevenson for the ceiling of Ramondre Stevenson, but recognizing that you're in an opportunity right now where you could sell him for that, or last season, and not taking those opportunities of holding out too much because this is what the market dictates it is, or I'm married to, I need to get a second round pick here, and not recognizing, hey, this is a player with short-term temporary value that a year ago I couldn't even gotten off of my roster if I wanted to, and now I can get value for him, and not capitalizing those windows.
Yeah. Jeff, if someone has been with us through the little hour and 10 minutes or so we've been chatting, if a manager is just going to take one thing away from our conversation, what should it be?
Fantasy football is volatile, and live and be comfortable in the volatility, embrace it, and recognize that ceiling outcomes are what decide weeks more often than not. And probably, I just think playing it down the middle is not a very good way to approach things.
When Alan Sislowski was on a few months ago, he kept describing it as he wants to be the one that runs into the burning building, because that's where that value is. And occasionally you do get scorched, but sometimes you end up with some really good assets on that. Well, Jeff, this has been really wonderful. It's great to see you in 3 dimensions a couple of weekends ago. Now I'm getting to see you in 2 dimensions. I get to see you in 2 dimensions again in about 5 minutes. But before we do that, tell everybody where they can find you and reach out to you if they have questions about their wide receiver rooms.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at For Whom J Bell Tolls, and other social media as well at For Whom J Bell Tolls. And then everything is exclusively through Footballguys. So if it's not coming out through social media, it's coming out through Footballguys.
All right. And thanks to everybody for watching, whether you're watching on YouTube or tuning in on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Please give us the likes and the subscribes. Dropping a review and a 5-star rating on Apple would really help this show grow. And be sure to stay tuned, because next week we're going to have yet another outstanding episode of Dynasty Compass.